the Iowa legislature. I was first elected in 2022 at the age of 23. My campaign was inspired by the number of friends I grew up with here in Eastern Iowa who I've seen leave the state due to the lack of opportunity, of frustration with regressive social policies, and really just a lack of effort from our state government to make young folks want to stay. I knocked close to 10,000 doors in my campaign between -10 and 100 degrees and ended up winning a really tight race. We have a great panel today joining us to talk about their experiences running for office and getting engaged in politics at a younger age. First up is Wisconsin Secretary of State and One Country Project board member Sarah Godlewski. Sarah was first elected as state treasurer when she was 36, and she ran for the U.S. Senate in 2022. She has served as the 31st Secretary of State for Wisconsin since 2023. Anderson Clayton is the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. First elected when she was 25, Anderson is the youngest state party chair in the U.S. And prior to serving as chair, Anderson worked on several different political campaigns. A couple of years ago, when I was an intern for One Country Project, I actually interviewed her about rural organizing. So it's good to see you again, Anderson. Ben Shire was first elected to the Fergus Falls, Minnesota City Council when he was 29 years old. Ben later served 2 terms as mayor of Fergus Falls, spearheading an economic development agenda that really reinvigorated his rural community. And then Angel Ramirez is the first Latina elected to the Iowa State House, representing House District 78. She was elected in a special election just this April, overperforming Kamala Harris in the district by over 20 points. She's a proud first generation college graduate and community organizer. Sarah, Anderson, Angel, and Ben, welcome to the Rural Progress Summit. Um, Sarah, Angel, and Anderson, this first question is for you three. There has been some reporting that the best way to get women to run for office is to ask repeatedly. Some articles list that women are told they should run for office approximately 7 times before they actually consider it. What was the motivator for you to run for office, and what was the main thing that made you really consider it for the first time? We can start with you, Anderson.
I honestly definitely think it was the ask, to be honest. I definitely think as somebody when you're 24 going into statewide politics, you don't necessarily think that state party chair is where you're going to end up. And so for me, it was definitely getting asked by so many folks throughout our party. And I think that was really, really helpful. So I encourage you all to ask people in your life to run for office, especially right now. We've got municipal elections going on in North Carolina, and North Carolina Democrats are gearing up to support our municipal candidates more than ever.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say my story is maybe a little bit different. I actually ran the constitutional amendment to save the state treasurer's office. Total nerd alert over here. I have a background in finance and was working to help access to capital for communities of color and women. And so when the Republicans were trying to get rid of this constitutional office, I thought that was suspicious, and then found myself running this bipartisan committee to save the office. And so when we won, the question was, well, who's going to now run for this office? And no one was necessarily telling me to run. I would say it was really kind of the opposite. They're like, you have no political experience. You don't have political connections, and you think you can run statewide for a state that represents almost 6 million people. And I'm from a kind of rural part of the state. It's not like I'm from a major urban area. And I remember, though, sharing this story with my grandma, who was part of the first group of women to serve during World War II. And she said to me, Sarah, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. She's like, you just got to do this. Like, you have worked really hard. You know so much about it. Like, just show them. And so I decided to put my name in. And actually, in my first election in 2018, I flipped more Trump counties than the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general in a down ballot race. So trust your gut. And, when you're really passionate and believe in yourself, you can do these things.
That's amazing. Angel?
Yeah, for me personally, my political awakening, so to speak, was around when I was 16 years old, when Trump was running and elected in his first presidential term. And it sparked these questions that I know a lot of young people are having to consider earlier and earlier on in their teenage years, which is, how can an individual spewing so much hate get so much support? How does racism and classism impact our political systems, our policies, our people? Right? Like these questions have been sparked for me. And so I've known for a long time that I wanted to assume office in order to impact my community in the most beneficial way possible. But that's not to say I didn't have imposter syndrome, right? One of my mentors, I had told him kind of shyly, right? I was a little bit shy about it, that I eventually wanted to run for office. I was like 19. And he told me, he was like, never stop telling people that, because then you're going to hold yourself accountable to it. And we need more young women in leadership positions, not just in elected positions, but in government, right? Like in staff positions and that sort of thing. And I think women, and especially women of color, have developed imposter syndrome as a survival mechanism. So it almost feels contradictory to be telling yourself, like, no, I can do this. I know what I'm talking about. But name a woman that never has a plan, right? Like women have plans, women have opinions, and we need to use those survival mechanisms, right, to the benefit of our community. Because we happen to know sometimes, more often than not, right, the obstacles that our communities face. So I would just encourage, ask, like Anderson said, ask people to run, because you never know when they might need that extra push. But also, if it's in the back of your mind, it's probably a good thing if you wake up and you're like, I don't necessarily want to be a politician, but I know I need to in order to save my community. That's probably a good sign that you're in it for the right reasons. So yeah, as Sarah said, listen to that gut feeling.
Ben, for our audience tuning in today that may have considered running for office before, how did you get started? Once you knew you wanted to run, what did you do to start a campaign?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's great to be with the group. I'm obviously not the young person in the room, but I do remember that moment that I decided to run. It was many moons ago now, but it was Labor Day 2004. We were at a family picnic, and in fact, I think our good friends Tessa Gould was at that same picnic, and we were talking politics like families do. And if you remember, there was what we thought was a heated presidential campaign that year. And I had lots of opinions, and I was giving them freely. And my dad, he said to me in a very respectful way, but he said, you should run for office. And I had never thought about it before, I guess. But I just remember that as a moment of clarity, because I had recently moved back to the area after living out of Minnesota and actually overseas for a while. But my wife and I were back. We had a 1-year-old son. My wife was pregnant with our second child, and I knew that Fergus Falls was where we were going to live, right? And I thought, what better way to get involved and be a part of the future that I want to see for my kids and for my community than running? And so for me, that was that moment of clarity. And at the local level, I had never, I didn't even know the first thing about local politics. I didn't even know what ward I lived in, but I knew that I wanted to be a part of the future of my community. And so it was kind of that call, that clarion call from my dad, like that said, hey, I think it's to what some of the other people were talking about too, right? To Sarah and Angel, like show up, right? Like be a part of the future that you want. So next thing you know, literally 24 hours later, I was at City Hall with my name filing for office. And from there, it's like, you don't have much choice, right? Like to make that decision, now you're in. And so what do you do in a local office? I think you understand, Adam, you knock doors, you talk to people. I did have one secret weapon though, that first campaign. And that is that my mother-in-law, I didn't know anyone in that particular ward, but my mother-in-law had raised four kids as a single mom in that area. So she introduced me to everyone. And I think there's an important lesson from me that I took at the time. I didn't even realize it was a lesson, but what do? You just go out and talk to people. And as progressives, I think in rural areas, I learned that lesson that you don't target, especially in local races. You talk to everybody and you find allies in unlikely places. And I think that's something that we can learn from today. So that's my story.
That's incredible. I'm going to open up this question to all of you. You know, it's no secret that the majority of American politicians are older and white men. I'll never forget being told one of my first days in the legislature, you know, 23, I have underwear that's older than 23, which maybe that's too old for underwear. But, you know, how do you navigate being taken seriously when you're often the youngest person in these rooms?
Well,
I think
I can say, Adam, I had a city council colleague that said the exact same thing to me on my first day on the city council. All right, like, hey, that underwear joke, it never gets old, does it? But I think for everyone, for me, like there's that moment, and everyone else was retired and everyone else was the old white guy. And hey, full disclosure, I'm that old white guy now. But you know, I'm reminded of something that Harry S. Truman said, like his time in Washington. He said, you spend the first 6 months trying to figure out how the hell you got there, and then the rest of your career wondering how the hell how the hell everyone else got there, right? And I think that that's the truth. And you realize you find your moment, you find your voice, and you go for it, right? And so I think we, you know, just showing those voices and having people and normalizing it, showing up to where young people are and showing them that their voice does matter and that they can and support them in running for office.
Yeah, and I can think
I
similar.
think that the answer. Oh, go for it,
Are
Sarah.
you sure? Also, I think very similarly to probably what a lot of us share. Like we always remember that first story. Like for me, it was I was just elected state treasurer, and I walked into a group of businessmen. We were going to have a finance meeting, and they were like, "We're looking for the state treasurer. Do you know where she is?" We're like waiting to meet her, and I'm like, "I am." And one of them's like, "You're not older than my daughter. How can you be the state treasurer?" And you know, at that moment, I think what to me I always remember is like, look, I represent 6 million people and they elected me for a reason. And I need to use that voice and that vision to, you know, command, I think, what I really ran for office in the first place to be able to do was to make change because we know the system, if you only have the same people sitting at the table, that's what it's going to always look like. And it's one of the reasons why, for me, I continue to be in this fight because we know, at least in the state of Wisconsin, less than 33% of our legislature are comprised of women, even though we're 51% of the population. And if you think about what are the first things that are always cut when it comes to bills, I mean, we saw it during COVID, it was paid family leave and affordable childcare. Now, if you had 50% of that body comprised of women instead of men that were in their 70s, that it wouldn't be treated like a political football. And so to me, it's also about, it really just emphasizes the importance of our voice and why representation really does matter to ensure good government.
I was going to add something a little bit more along the lines of the number one critique that I got when I was running for office as a state party chair is just fundraising and that young people can't fundraise. And that's one of the biggest proponents that we have, I think, is sort of a theory of like that people can weaponize against young people when they're running for office is that you're not going to be able to compete on that scale, and especially within the party structure. And so at least for me, it was making sure that I did the call time, that I worked hard and I reached out to donors. I introduced myself, people that, you know, maybe didn't give me money one year, came back the next year. And because I had made those connections, were willing to do it the next time. But it was really learning how to make sure that North Carolina, that I could sell the state and that I could also help people understand that giving to a state party was helping down ballot candidates and then being able to disperse that funding. And so the state party was one of the largest funders for our Supreme Court justice, thinking about that for also my House and my Senate caucuses. And just the ability to do that was something where a lot of people bought into young people running for office and helped me enable that. And so it is a really powerful force, I think, with how we can legitimize ourselves, honestly, when we're in spaces like this, because people do listen to the folks that are funding them. And I hate to say it like that, but I think that especially young people in positions of power, you've got to be able to put up as much as everybody else can when you're trying to make headwinds in a structure, a political system like we exist in right now in some ways. So.
Yeah, completely echo what Anderson shared. Um, my first day, right before I was about to get sworn in, I came over to my desk. It has my name on it. You know, I'm in a suit, right? The whole 9 yards. And I sit at, you know, my desk where my name is at, and the Republican legislator right next to me was like, "Oh, are you the legislative aide or the clerk?" And I was like, "No, I'm the person who got, you know, 79% of my district vote, right? So I had to decide in that split second how I was going to navigate that space, and deciding that I was going to be firm and still warm in my approach to people who very clearly have misconceptions of young people in office, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, right, to everyone's point here, we were elected for a purpose. And however uncomfortable it might be at first when you're pushing back on these misconceptions, it's necessary for you to be able to have respect in those rooms so that you can accomplish the goal of helping your community. Um, I'll share an example of a way that I try to do this is I go by Representative Ramirez when I'm in spaces that have felt unwelcoming to young people or people of color in the past. And I'm very particular about correcting people, because you know, I was taught by an old professor of mine, who was one of my only professors who went by Dr. his last name, right? His name is Dr. Johnson. And pretty much all my other professors went by his first name. But he was a Black man working in a PWI. And he shared that that's really important, not for his students necessarily, but for the culture of the institution, to be able to share, right, his level of expertise and be respected for it on face value. And some of that comes with these little mechanisms and how we refer to ourselves, right? How we are able to pitch ourselves and pitch our communities and be able to bring that back to actionable change. And to Anderson's point, right? Deliver. And that's the biggest thing that you can do, is deliver on your promises and deliver on those numbers, and how many doors you knock, how many people you bring in, how many doors you knock over to bring people into spaces, right? Like in a metaphorical sense. So all of those things help contribute. But knowing that it's going to be an uphill battle, I think was helpful for me, that I had some people telling me that going in. So I knew exactly what to expect. It wasn't a surprise necessarily.
You know, Angel, one of the things that most impressed me about your campaign, getting up there and knocking doors, was just like your group of friends and the young people around you
Mhm.
that really were invested in you winning and your, you know, the change that you can make. How did you build that community, and how meaningful was that in winning that race?
Yeah, I think it's so important that as electeds, as people who hold positions of power, we see one of our roles as uplifting other people to that same level of power. Um, it's so important to not only building our party, but also being a genuine, right, authentic politician in the best way possible of helping your community, right? Breaking down barriers to access and that sort of thing. And for a lot of my friends, a lot of them have been in organizing spaces, but more often than not, this was their first introduction. And part of what I felt very strongly about was that my platform, being progressive, made it easier for young people to want to join, easier for people to believe in the campaign and what it promised for a future of Iowa, right? So it's not only, you know, opening that door so that people could take the step in, so that they could start to get involved in ways that they haven't before. But it's making sure that your platform and what you're speaking about resonates with young people. Um, you know, there are national trends that show that young people are more likely to identify with leftist ideology rather than party, right? They're less likely to vote blue just because it's a Democrat, and more likely to vote blue because it's a progressive candidate. And to that point, I think we have to make sure that our platforms are speaking to those groups of people and showing that we're working to make the party, right, more progressive. And that makes it a more inclusive space.
Sarah, is there an experience prior to your political career that really helps keep you grounded in terms of being a champion for rural America and rural Wisconsin?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, it's my family. I mean, I remember, I have a fifth generation Wisconsinite in my family. A majority of them is from northwestern Wisconsin, which is at least a 3.5 hour drive to Madison, a 4.5, 5 hour drive to Milwaukee. And so, um, growing up, there's like a stoplight is a big deal. Like going to a community where there's, a McDonald's was really exciting and they had a drive-through. And, when I look at my family, they were teachers or small business owners that were really critical to this community, and they were hardworking. They just put their head down and did what they were supposed to do. And then and I look at, my generation, a lot of us left. And it wasn't because we didn't care about our communities that raised us. It was because there weren't any more opportunities. I mean, opportunities have left so many rural communities. And so, like, for me, I needed to get a job and pay off my student loans. Like, it wasn't about the ability not to want to come home. It was, how do I come home and survive? And so that's what I think about a lot, is how are we making sure there's opportunity in rural parts of our community where, you can raise your family, they can get a quality education, they can get health care, because we are seeing hospitals are closing. We are seeing small businesses are shutting down, and this, the basic core things that folks need aren't always there. And so thinking about that all the time is going to make, I believe, like, our state and our community better.
That's so awesome. Sounds a lot very similar to some of the conversations we're having here in Iowa. Anderson, how have you seen the Democratic Party in North Carolina change since you became the party chair?
I think that there's a lot of good growth that's happening. Our state executive committee, and for those of you that don't necessarily know what that is, it's sort of the governing body of each state party that we have and in the country. And right now, my SEC is at 50% new people, which historically doesn't really happen. So we had a lot of turnover, a lot of shift in sort of the type of folks that decided to volunteer and get involved with the party this year. And we have a year-round organizing team, and it's really exciting because we're following in the footsteps of Wisconsin and also states like Michigan, who have focused really on keeping party staff year round. And as a former field organizer and somebody that my biggest disappointment when I was organizing for electoral purposes was just like it would end at it was cycle based. And I think that one of the greatest things that we can do as a party is invest in year round organizing and really try to keep people in communities, and that are also from those communities that have either run for office or that have been a campaign manager on a state legislative race beforehand, and really have them be able to join the party and stay on year round. So we have 6 people in my organizing department so far, and we have about 33,000 active volunteers so far with the North Carolina Dems this year that have done some form of action, whether that be an accountability canvas, or they've done a house party, or they've done a phone bank, which is really cool to see because it's twice as much as we had last year at this point in time. And so I'm judging the energy of how it builds in the party, and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of that hard work and effort goes into making sure that we are able to sustain that for not just the 26 cycle, but every cycle after that too. And we're really focused on municipal elections this year, like I said earlier, because I'm like the work that those folks do. And shout out to Ben. Thank you for being on city council, because I think it is amazing to be able to see that, the closer down the ballot that you get, the closer to your front door that you get. And so we're trying to prioritize people's energy and really shifting. What's happening at the national level right now is scary. It's unprecedented. And I understand that it's sparking fear in so many people across this country, but there's still power to be held. And Republicans are winning right now, and they are holding the narrative of that we can't change that, and we can't change what's going on. And I really am challenging people to try to start with their backyard. And I think that it's really inspiring to see how many people in North Carolina are taking that charge too.
Our motto as the Johnson County, Iowa Democrats is no off years. And I gotta say, 33,000 volunteers in the off year is pretty unbelievable. Ben Anderson really gave us the segue there, but a lot of people don't know about the power and importance of their local government. Can you talk us through, why these offices are so important? why people should get involved in local elections and why that's where you chose to get involved.
Yeah. Yeah, Anderson did a great job. I mean, like she said, nothing is closer to your front door than local politics, right? And there's not, I think it's nationally 96% of elected officials serve in local office, right? So there's no better place to shape the community and to shape the future of the places that we live through public spaces, through parks and libraries and our local schools and through economic development. When I ran for mayor, it was a really simple message. It was really there was dozens of empty storefronts in our downtown. We had a river running through our community that Fergus Falls, people would come to Fergus Falls and they'd say, "Where are the falls?" They didn't even know that this river existed. And our campaign was all about bringing people together and being in control of things for our community in the future for our community that we had control over. You can do that at local government. And we invested in public spaces along the river. We brought people in. We leveraged limited public dollars to create private investment. We redeveloped industrial sites along the river that had sat vacant, not only vacant, but dilapidated and contaminated since I was in grade school. And so people saw that, right? And so there's opportunities to shape the future in local government that, quite honestly, I don't know that they exist at other levels. And I have all the respect in the world for state and federal offices, but there's a real opportunity to shape tomorrow in your local communities. And as far as, when it comes to the importance of local elections, our country, I think Anderson also talked about the nationalization of local politics, right? Like there is a lot of fears out there. And I think the opportunity at the local level. So in where I come from, if local elections are going to be referendums on national politics, we're going to lose every time. Like that's just the reality of where I live. But we have the opportunity at the local level to connect our values to local issues and win and show people that the government, that shared prosperity and that lifting all people up and we're stronger together and that government can be a part of that future and government can be a positive impact in people's lives. You can show them that in ways I think that connect with people. And again, it's right there. It's right in front of you. And who doesn't want strong schools for their children or for their grandchildren or for their neighbors' children? I mean, those are things that you can immediately have impacts. And again, share the values that I think as progressives we that are at our core. Show in different ways than they're getting on the national news.
That's incredible. I really am inspired when I see those local candidates, cut through the national partisan politics and really focus on delivering for their constituents. Angel, you ran and won not only as a younger candidate, but as a woman and the first Latina elected in Iowa. And you also managed to win your district by a wider margin than Kamala Harris carried it by during the last election. What's the secret formula? What did you hear on the doors in Cedar Rapids? And how do we bottle that for other young candidates?
I don't think the answer is super black and white. For me personally as a candidate, I've spent the last 7 years since I've lived in my town being an organizer, right? Being a community advocate. And so my community knows me, right? I think, obviously not every person knew me, but there was a lot of people in the community that trusted me because I've shown up for them and their interests and their families over the last few years, right? As a part of my very being, right? It's clear that it was genuine and it is authentic to who I am. And so I think that carried over. Some people can't say you can't push from the outside and push from the inside, right? I completely disagree with that. I think more organizers should run for office. I think more advocates should run for office because that's what you're doing, right? In your position, you're advocating for your community. So I think that had something to do with it. I also think, right, to your question earlier, we were able to get quite a lot of volunteers in a very short period of time. From start to finish, my special election was about 3 weeks. And that included a week and a half or so of getting the Democratic nomination from my local party. And after we got the Democratic nomination, we had a little over a week and a half where we raised over $16,000. We knocked every door in our district almost twice over. and we outperformed, right? We were able to get over 150 volunteers because, again, my community knew me and trusted me. And I didn't shy away from talking about difficult subjects. I know that you always have to, balance things as electeds, and I live in a bluer district, but I was still running against someone. I was opposed, and so being able to stand firm in my beliefs energized a lot of people, and a lot of people that I think from the outside looking in, you wouldn't have necessarily expected them to lean into a progressive platform. But they did, because people are tired of civil rights being stripped. In Iowa, that's being done on the state level. And then obviously we're feeling it from a federal level as well. People are wanting to believe in those who stand by their convictions and protect the most vulnerable in their community. And that was felt in my community. People were energized by that and felt inspired by our campaign's platform. We talked about human-centered policies a lot, right? How do we increase the quality of life of our neighbors? How do we build a community in which protects our kids, our students, our neighbors, our grandparents, right? Every single person in our community nobody should be left behind. So I think all of those things together created that secret sauce, right? The formula to be able to win and win big. And most importantly, and you kind of touched on this with your question earlier, breaking down barriers to get involved in politics, in advocacy, in community work was really important to our campaign.
I want to pick up on that thread of organizers running for office. I was an organizer on campaigns. I feel like we still, we'll have votes in the legislature and I'll see the faces of people whose doors I knocked when I'm trying to figure out, what to do on these difficult votes. Anderson, how did being an organizer prepare you to be, the chair of a large organization like the North Carolina Democratic Party?
I still talk to my organizers on a regular basis, and I think it made me I think any job that you have in a state party or even, in state office is difficult. I'll give anybody that. But I think still the hardest job on a campaign or elsewhere is an organizer's job. And so I will always try to make sure, no matter like where I'm at in sort of a coordinated campaign or whether I'm at, in a cycle like the one that we're in right now for the municipal elections, of just consistently checking in with the people that are closest to the people. Because I think sometimes our jobs get more and more separated can get more and more separated from the everyday. And sometimes I have to remind myself too, which you all probably don't experience this because you're actual elected officials you represent Republicans and Democrats. I only represent Democrats. And so if I wanted to, I could go through my whole life and not talk to a Republican, but I live in rural North Carolina still. And I try to make that point of it because I still want to be able to get outside my own bubble. And I think that sometimes the party can be a bubble for us, and trying to make sure that the folks that I have right now on the ground understand that too, of like, you can't organize those that you don't love. And right now, the easiest folks for us to hate are folks that voted differently from us than the last election cycle. And I'm like, that's not the way that we need to be approaching our communities or organizing in the future. And those are really tough conversations, I think, to have inside a party right now. But like, it is something that I've always felt since I was organizing in Iowa. And honestly, I credit the state of Iowa so much with giving me the belief of what Ben has said so much on this, of just talking to every person, like limiting yourself and who you talk to in a rural community is actually the downfall and the detriment of our party right now. And I think that rebranding ourselves and reshaping what the Democratic Party stands for means that we'll talk to anybody and we're not afraid to. And actually, I don't really care what your party identification is. Like, I'm a Democrat and I'd love for you to be one, but I think that the conversation still needs to be there, even if you're not one right now. And that's sort of what I think that organizing sort of is my mantra that I like to live by.
If you all could give one message or share one message with a young person who's on the fence thinking about running for office, what would you tell them? And we'll start with Sarah and then go to Ben and Anderson on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if not you, who? And if not now, when? I mean, I think that you can always think of other people potentially, but your experiences matter. And I think if you can also always say, well, maybe someday. And that someday will be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later. And then that opportunity just never was there. And look, like, I think we can all share how saying it out loud, as Representative Ramirez talked about, can be scary. Like, I want to run for office can be scary, and thinking that, people might laugh at you or think you're not qualified, but that's exactly why you need to do it, because we're going to get the same old, same old, same old. And we're only going to break that if we have different people who are stepping up, young people who have different experiences. I mean, I look again at the US Senate and I laugh sometimes because I'm like, here are folks that are trying to regulate AI and the internet, and I don't even think they have a Gmail account, let alone no Instagram. And so how can I expect them to be thinking about the best, ways to be, forming laws around these things when they're not using it as part of their day-to-day lives in the way that, for example, like we are. And so I just really think for anybody who is listening today, to really start thinking through why you and why now, and start talking about why you want to run and say it out loud.
Yeah,
I think about the famous well, Senator, we run ads line, when one of the senators asked Mark Zuckerberg how they make money at Facebook. But yeah, it's shocking sometimes. Or I remember showing some of my colleagues ChatGPT and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Ben, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Sarah. And I would say, as the old person in the room, I would just say simply that the future gets here a lot faster than you think. So be a part of it, right? Like, in the blink of an eye, it's going to be gone. Be a part of the future that you want to create. And I'm reminded when Sarah was talking, I'm reminded of a story that I heard related that President Barack Obama told when he was considering running for president as a United States senator, and he had a conversation with Senator Tom Daschle. And the way I remember the story was he was on the fence and he was thinking well, it's probably not my time. There's a million reasons, as Sarah alluded to, a million reasons why it might not be your time. And Senator Daschle just said to him, you don't know what the future holds, right? You have the opportunity, it's in front of you right now. Go for it and take it. And I think that's an example we can all say thanks for taking that advice, President Obama. But I think there are considerations, right? Know the office you're running for. There's time considerations and financial considerations and family all those things, right? Of course, but there's nothing more important, in my opinion, that you can do than sign up and run for public office. And if the opportunity is there, if you're considering it, there's a reason you're considering it. And just go for it. Yeah, at some point you just go for it.
Anderson?
I was somebody when I ran for state party chair, people told me that I was going to stick my neck out there and my head could get lobbed off in politics. And if you run, you may never be able to do it again. And I find that to be complete bullshit now, right? I think that anyone should be comfortable running for office. And it's okay if you lose, it's okay if you stand up for your values and what you think the direction of this party or, your district should be right now. And I would just encourage everybody. The one thing I got told before I ran that always stuck with me is Kelvin Stallings looking at me and being like, if you remember your why, you will never have any regrets. And my why was always that I wanted a party that was going to stand up and fight back for rural North Carolina and not just cede ground to a party that had fully endorsed white supremacy and wanted to see the demise of our communities with their policies. And what we just saw this last week come from Washington, D.C., with Republicans stripping 17 million people from healthcare access across our country. You cannot say that Republicans right now are standing up for the districts that they represent. And a lot of them got gerrymandered into doing that. And so my thing is that if you think that any of the people right now that are sitting in those seats deserve to sit in them, why should you not in some sense too? And I just think that there's so many reasons why people right now should feel that hunger and that fire to want to fight back against what's happening, even in races that you may, or that people may deem unwinnable in so many ways too.
Mhm. Yeah, all of what you guys said resonates with me in different ways. I understand like how scary it is, right? I just went through those feelings myself, and working through that now. But I will say that I don't think that like the feeling of being ready is what you might think it is, right? Like Ben shared, there are so many considerations that you have to take into account. And also, if you embrace being a lifelong learner, and if you have your why, like you're good, you are good. Try it, because it's time for the blue wave. Like, why not be the leaders of it? And I would also say that there's a lot of us who are seeing our local officials kind of cower away from protecting our communities. They're maybe taking preemptive, unnecessary responses to federal and state attacks, on equity issues, on different funding issues, that sort of thing. And that doesn't have to happen, right? We can have strong-willed leaders that are considering the most vulnerable in our communities and beyond in these positions. But we have to have people who are ready to take that stance. And if you feel that fire, go for it. Keep your politicians accountable. And when they aren't, when they're not protecting the people around you, primary the hell out of them, even if they're in your own party, right? That's how we shift our party for the better. That might be an unnecessary or a controversial opinion, but I think that, in order to shift our party for the better, we have to be willing to push it. And part of that is running, and not cowering away, and not falling into that fear that often the other side really wants us to fall into.
And I
We
think
have a
the
question. Oh, go ahead.
sorry, the other theme I want to just hit on that I think everybody's getting to in their comments is fear of failing. I think part of the reason why people are afraid to run is it's really a public failure. Your name's on the ballot. You have to knock on doors. You have to go out there, and you almost feel like if you're losing, one could say like it's a public failure. And as somebody who has also run and lost, one of the things that my dad said to me, because I was really upset when I lost, and I wasn't upset because of myself. I was upset because I felt like I had let down so many people that I was really fighting for. The reason why I ran, a lot of women and girls, and this was at the height of when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we had an 1849 abortion ban here in Wisconsin. And to me, my dad, looked at me and he goes, "Sarah, remember, failure's never fatal and success is never final." And, for you, your public service journey is just that. And it is going to continue to be a journey. And so I say that to everybody here because while it might not work out, when the door shuts, a window opens. And I think that's exactly also what you have to think about in running for office. You might not get it the first time, but you shouldn't be afraid to step up and try again.
That's a really, really strong point. And I think, one thing I thought about a lot when I was running was, running a campaign that I could be proud of, even if it wasn't successful. We have a question in the chat about staying authentic to your real voice, and how folks in this group did this running as younger candidates. And obviously, we're in an environment now where, the public expects so much more of your voice on all these platforms. Really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
When I first started considering the idea of running, my background in organizing around advocacy issues was a very clear thing that I knew I was going to either have to lean into or shy away from. And it didn't feel right for me to even consider shying away from it because I'm proud of that work. I have been very active in the Black Lives Matter movement for the last 5 years. And I had some older people who used to hold office tell me, don't talk about that, right? Like, don't talk about these things, because you might alienate people. And instead of listening to that advice, I leaned into being able to share my experiences and then relate it back to people who might not be as familiar as I am with those movements. I related it back to union workers and labor, right? I related it back to veterans who are fighting for mental health care and healthcare when they come back, right? All of those things. And so instead of shying away from it, I just figured out how to package it and make it more accessible to people with different identities. And I think that's how you remain genuine to your voice, to your messaging. You just figure out a way to make it more accessible for people, because at the end of the day, right, we all have our individual identities, we all have our individual experiences. Our communities are different from one another. So not shying away from that conversation, finding common ground, and then also listening to when there are specific issues that impact a certain community more than others, I think is really important. And I hope that gets to the question of how you remain, authentic to your own voice. And I also think, right, like, one critique that I've had of my own party is that we sometimes do a poor job at showing people that we are the party of the people. Sometimes we come across as too polished, that it then translates into being disconnected from the average person. It becomes inaccessible to the average person. And, we really need to learn how to embrace everyday issues and be comfortable in talking about it, because that's what like the average American wants and needs out of their politicians, their elected officials who are going to advocate for their communities at the end of the day.
I will also say, kind of like everybody talked about their why, you want to look, whether you win or lose, and really know your why. I think authenticity also has to be a North Star, because to me, if you can't be authentic to who you are, then how do you think you can represent other people? And I think that includes telling people, I can say for me in particular, like, there were a lot of thoughts and opinions about how a young woman should be acting and running for office. And to me, sure, I'll take and hear all the advice people want to give me, but I've got to stay authentic to who I am. And I think that there's also people can see through when you're not. And they don't, to them, you could just be another politician that they don't trust. And so I think authenticity is really important and kind of has to be at the core of this work day in and day out.
I think it's a little bit harder, to be honest, when you're a state party chair, because I got a lot of different opinions in this party. But the one that I try to get people focused on is that Democrats, at least, I think, though we have different disagreements about how to make people's lives better, we still want to make people's lives better. And Republicans on the other end of that don't. But I also think that I try to have really good relationships and conversations with people on the ground in all different, if we're going to say we're going to be a big tent party, we actually need to be a big tent party. And I think that means expanding the tent so that all different types of ideology and opinions are welcome in it. And that is the beauty about being a Democrat right now, to me. And I think it is that we have got to really expand the access to that to everybody. And that's something where I feel like me as a party chair, I try to focus on about how do you give a voice. And I think that a lot of people have touched on this earlier too, but extending the microphone to communities that need it the most and that also want to be heard. And I also really try to encourage, because I think that the biggest spokespeople right now for our party are the people that choose to run for office, because everybody is talking about a message, and I'm like, it's the messengers that matter the most to me and that matter the most to the people on the ground. And so I think that if you don't like the party too that you're looking at right now, or to the point that was made earlier, your representative, run, because like it is the time, it is the moment, I think, to be able to challenge systems and also to be able to grow our organization in the best way possible too.
Yeah, I guess I might just have my own personal experience. I served as mayor in a very, very conservative community, and there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to get done. And there was a bunch of things that were progressive ideals that I wanted to bring to our community, but I knew I couldn't do that if I wasn't elected. And so for me, it was go back to that why, figure out how does that why connect to the community that I want to serve, and then stay laser focused on, how do we bring economic opportunities to people, bring people into the process that have not been brought into the process before. And to me, it was really, really, really laser focused on that economic message that can connect the values of my progressive values to the community that I want to serve. And once you're in office, there's a lot, there's a lot of things you can do, but for me, it was just being authentic, understanding, looking at my kids and understand that I was doing, I wanted to see a community that they were proud of, that they had a future and that they could live in, that they could, they could call home and they see as an economically viable place to live and raise a family when they grow up, right? And in an environment where people are saying these rural communities are dead, and that was true in my community as well. But just stayed focused, laser focused on that economic message, which was authentic to who I was.
I love that. I have a theory really with these local races that like folks really can get to know one thing about you. And so,
Well,
I always, tried to stay really focused on my message of bringing young people opportunity for young people. And almost every question I, found an angle to talk about it through that lens.
yeah, and we talked about, in my campaign for my first campaign for mayor, we talked about rebuilding downtown, local business, and making investments in our downtown and our river. And my wife and I started two Main Street businesses from scratch, like literally built them from the ground up. And that's authentic within our community, right? And if you can focus your message on that, it's amazing what you could do when you have that message that can resonate with people. And we all have that authentic. I think that in this party, we have the authentic voice that resonates with people, and the caring for our neighbors and economic prosperity and bringing people. I truly believe our message is there. We just have to focus that on the issues that are locally that affect people's lives, and then go out and tell them and go out and meet them where they're at and deliver it.
That's incredible. Do you all have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience about, young folks running for office, your experience, and what folks can do maybe to help young people who are running for office?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just knowing that, when you run for office too, there's no playbook. That, there's not like an onboarding or something that people give you. It's really, I would say, a blank canvas. And how do you want to represent your constituents while aligning your values? Because I think that's sometimes a shock for certain people. And again, I think it does depend on your office, but you can really think through creatively how you want to best do that. And I think the other thing is not going back to like not being afraid. I remember when I was first started my role as Secretary of State, I came up with a pretty ambitious vision, and all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, she's so ambitious. Like, what is she doing? And I'm like, but that's what I was elected to do, was to come up with ideas, because what we had been doing, I didn't think was good enough. And I think too, for women, that sometimes, especially young women, ambition can sometimes be a 4-letter word. And I guess my advice is to make sure that you realize like that's your power. Is that ambition, and not be afraid to be ambitious, because we would never be anywhere if we didn't have ambitious people who are willing to step up. So
I love that so much. I find the whole thing of like people running for office and pretending they don't want to be in that office to just be extremely bizarre. And like I want to know why you want this and why it's important to you. And that means you're ambitious. I think it's a really great piece of advice.
I would add to that. Again, from my perspective, from the local office, I see a nationalization of issues that makes people feel like they have to be experts on things to be a part of and they just tune out, right? And I think that what I would share is my experience, some of the best conversations I've had on doors is when you just understand that you don't have the answers for everything. Nobody's expecting you to be an expert on every single issue you're going to run for, but they appreciate that ambition. They appreciate your why, your desire to serve. And they're not looking for superheroes. They're looking for people with your experiences. And young people are not represented to the extent that they need. We need young people to run, and people appreciate that a lot more. There's this wall that people seem to think that they can't get past, but I think people are not, again, they're not looking for experts. They're looking for human beings with real life experience. And I think young people bring that is severely missing in today's politics.
I also think, just to add on to that, is, as my mom always says, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, more listening and less talking. And I think that, one of the other important lessons is for you to admit, like, sometimes you just don't know. And that's why you're here and you want to learn. And, I think sometimes in these, like, elected officials, yes, you want to hear their ideas, but they need to hear your ideas. That's what makes us the best that we can be. And so I think there's sometimes this, like, false perception that you're supposed to know it all. And the reality is that I think the best leaders are the ones who can say they don't know, but they're going to learn by listening.
Yeah, I'll say, like, the coolest part of running for office for me was this community I've lived in my whole life, learning something new about it every day. Things and organizations and groups and ideas I didn't know existed in this community that I've always been in. And so I really love that advice as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I echo that. It always stuck out to me when I asked, or when I told people, I am proud to be a lifelong learner, and that's something that I want that title, right? And that includes learning from my communities. Because as I said earlier, right, like, we all have different lived experiences. So learning from different communities around you is so critical to be able to inform how you move and navigate in a political space. And I don't know. I think that people are desperate for hope right now. It's grim, right? Like, people are sad, people are scared, people are in fear, and the amount of people who are older than me that thanked me for running and told me that it gave them hope to see young people running for office, and a young person who's not afraid to stand by their value system. I mean, like, it could bring tears to my eyes, because I had older people, like, crying, thanking me. And it, like, kind of hit me right in this moment of, this isn't for me, really. Like, this is also for my community to be able to believe that we have a better future to come. There is a better country at the end of this fight. There's a better future at the end of the tunnel. And it's okay to believe in that hope for a future, and it's okay to voice it. In fact, I think people need to hear the visions that we see for our future. I like to talk about how I can't wait for the day where people aren't afraid to call the ambulance if they get into a car accident. I can't wait for the day for people to be able to take their kids out to dinner twice a week, just because. I can't wait for the day for people to be able to afford to go on vacation with their family. These are things that should be normalized, and it gives people hope to talk about them in a normalized fashion, because we need to hear that right now. We need to hear what a vision for the future can look like, and that really resonates with people. So just lean into that, because I know that young people are opinionated, and we need to share those opinions. We need to share our visions for the future.
Well, Sarah, Anderson, Ben, Angel, thank you so much for joining us at the Real Progress Summit. To learn more about our speakers and their work, you can visit their bios in the Summit virtual lobby. I will now turn the summit back over to Senator Heitkamp for a discussion about immigration in rural America. A reminder to our viewers on Zoom, please return to the lobby and then select Immigration in Rural America from the list of sessions. For our viewers on YouTube, the stream will resume in a new post momentarily. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Adam.